Scene start visual. Fast-paced, high-gloss drone footage, chorus catting over the Dubai Marina skyline at dusk. The camera plunged vertically down the glass face of an ultra-luxury 70-story skyscraper. Its surface reflecting the amber glow of the Persian Gulf. Suddenly, the frame jolts. The sound of a deafening crack echoes, ext. Street level, night dramatic dashcam footage shows a massive 500-pound shard of reinforced glass smashing directly into the hood of a stationary supercar. The alarms scream. Pedestrians scatter in terror. Audio, Cable News Energy promo music. Heavy synth beats. Urgent drum hits the sound of tearing metal and shattering glass narrator. VO. Voice dripping with urgency. Rapid fire delivery. It was designed to be the crown jewel of New Dubai. A 70-story, razor-edge rhomboid monument of pure geometric minimalism rising over the multi-billion-dollar luxury waterfront. A building wrapped entirely in an unbroken, hyper-reflective blue mirror, engineered to reflect the pristine megayachts of the marina and the historic does of the creek back at themselves. Backed by one of the largest sovereign-backed investment conglomerates in the Middle East, with a staggering initial budget of $250 million, it promised the ultimate playground for the global elite. Visual. Graphic flashes on screen, 250 million, original budge, red strict-through, appears. 550 million plus final cost, flashes and pulsing red text, narrator VO. But instead of corporate confidence and high net worth serenity, this $500 million glass monolith delivered pure, unadulterated terror. For 5 agonizing years, this hyper-luxury tower did something unthinkable. It rained 500-pound sheets of razor-sharp insulated glass directly onto the crowded promenades and luxury retail boulevards below. Visual. Fast text cuts over archived smartphone. Footage of police cordos and emergency vehicles with flashing lights outside a gleaming skyscraper. 10,344, Panachrison, a cree of plywood in the desert 500, tons of emergency steel narrator, VO. Imagine a facade so utterly shattered, so profoundly broken, that over an acre of this multi-million-dollar architectural marvel had to be patched over with cheap, marine-grade plywood boards, transforming a sleek billionaire's mirror into a grotesque 60-story checkerboard. A building where the primary anchor tenants and high-flying expats couldn't even move into their ultra-luxury penthouses because the tower was legally designated a falling object hazard zone. Visual. Dramatic camera pan to a historic urban contrast. The foot of the modern scraper sits directly adjacent to a reconstructed heritage souk and early 20th century, traditional Arabic, mosque with intricate stone minaret narrator, VRO. But the glass raining from the sky wasn't even the most terrifying part. Deep beneath the sun-baked pavement, the very earth was giving way. Built on highly unstable, reclaimed coastal land, the immense weight of the tower was causing a catastrophic shifting of the water table. And right next door, a designated Emirati cultural heritage site, a century-old stone mosque and traditional mud brick souk, was literally being ripped apart at the seams. Structural masonry splitting down the center. Traditional stained glass arches popping out of their frames. Visual spillet screen. On the left, an architectural rendering of an award, glowing gold. On the right, a simulation of a scraper swaying dangerously in a desert sham of windstorm narrator. And yet, in a twist that defies all logic, just as engineers were frantically rushing 1,500 tons of emergency structural steel into the core because they weren't sure the building could withstand a standard desert windstorm, a prestigious regional architectural association handed the tower its highest design honor. The ultimate masterpiece was, in reality, a 50,000-ton ticking time bomb. This is the untold story of how Dubai's most ambitious luxury skyscraper became the most dangerous address in the Middle East. Visual. The title cards explode on screen with the sound of crashing glass title card. Boston's $160 M glass skyscraper shattered 500 window rained onto the streets. Dubai adaptation narrator VO. To understand how a project of this magnitude collapses into a multi-million-dollar safety crisis, you have to look past the glitz of the marketing brochures and stare directly into the brutal reality of fast-tracked Gulf mega engineering. In the late boom years, the mandate from corporate boardrooms was simple: build bigger, build sleeker, and do it faster than anyone else on Earth. The investment firm hired a world-renowned global architecture partnership, and the design fell to an elite principle known for uncompromising geometric minimalism. Visual, 3D animation showing the sharp, rhomboid geometry of the tower. The sun glints harshly off the blue metallic skin narrator VO. The concept was breathtaking on paper. A razor-edge rhomboid tower, 60 stories of totally unbroken, highly reflective glass, no ornamental columns, no structural setbacks to break the lines, no visible exterior framework. Just a sheer, monolithic blue mirror rising like a mirage out of the desert sand. The reflective glass was pitched as a brilliant gesture of cultural harmony. A modern megastructure that would honor its historic heritage neighbor by seamlessly mirroring its minarets and wind towers rather than visually overpowering them. Visual. The lighting shifts from bright day to a dark, ominous dust storm over the marina. The cameras sink down to the ground level, emitting imitation pilings according to a technical schematic narrator, VO. But ambitious design concepts mean absolutely nothing when they collide with the unforgiving laws of physics and the volatile nature of reclaimed coastal geology. The nightmare didn't start 60 stories in the air. It started 50 feet below the ground, before a single pane of luxury glass was ever installed. Because underneath the glamorous promenades of New Dubai lies a geological trap that the developers completely underestimated. A scene end. Scene start visual. Heavy trucks and excavators operating under intense floodlights at a massive construction crater in Business Bay, Dubai Marina. The cameras zoom in on the ground base where mud and copper-colored water seep through steel walls. Audio. Low, Sabas rumble. The sound of metal under extreme lateral stress. A repetitive, ominous groan narrator VO. To build a $500 million skyscraper in Dubai, you aren't just fighting time, you are fighting the sea. The entire foundation of this high-end waterfront sector is built on an engineering gamble. This isn't naturally compacted rock or dense continental soil. In the mid to late development booms, the city aggressively reclaimed massive swathes of tidal mudflats, shallow coastal zones, and salt marshes, filling them in with a chaotic mix of dredged marine sand, gravel, and whatever fill material was readily available. The result? A geological nightmare. Notoriously soft, saturated, shifting, and wildly unpredictable under heavy structural loads. Visual. 3D infographic explaining the hydro pressure of the water table in Dubai Marina arose push forcefully against a temporary retaining wall. Narrator, VO. Every single mega project along the coast has to balance on this knife edge. If you dig too deep without proper stabilization, the Persian Gulf will literally reclaim the pit. In 1968, as construction crews began the massive excavation phase for the tower's deep basement and foundation pilings, the nightmare manifested. To hold back this volatile, waterlogged subterranean soup, engineers drove massive temporary steel sheet piling retaining walls deep into the ground. But they miscalculated the brutal lateral pressure of the surrounding wet clay, shifting sand, and heavy mud. Visual, dramatic, computer simulation, showing the steel retaining walls bowing inward, causing the soil behind them to sink and displace outward in waves. Narrator, VO. Under the immense hydrostatic and lateral forces, the temporary steel retaining walls began to warp. They buckled inward toward the open excavation site. And that underground structural failure didn't stop at the construction fence. It triggered a catastrophic domino effect that rippled outward through the entire premium district. Visual. Series of quick, sensational cuts, cracked asphalt on a major urban promenade, high-end water mains, bursting underground. Expat pedestrians watching in shock as a sidewalk drops 3 feet. Narrator, VO. The ground beneath the neighborhood was literally migrating. High-voltage utility lines buckled and snapped under the shifting soil matrix. Main water pipelines ruptured, flooding subterranean channels. Prestigious retail sidewalks cracked open like peanut shells and dropped multiple feet overnight. And right across the main thoroughfare, Dubai's prized historical centerpiece, the century-old heritage mosque and stone masonry souk complex, started breaking apart in real time. Visual. Up-close infrared scanning style shots of structural cracks spreading across an ancient mosque archway. Pieces of traditional gypsum plaster crumble. Narrator, VO. This wasn't a minor cosmetic blemish. The immense displacement of the water table and mud pulled the very ground out from under the historic structure's shallow footings. The heavy, traditional stone masonry walls split wide open along their structural mortar joints. Exquisite, handcrafted stained glass windows, dating back generations, shifted violently within their expanding wooden frames, shattering under the unyielding pressure. Intricate interior murals and historical decorative calligraphy surfaces, preserved for nearly a century against the harsh desert climate, were physically ripped apart. A landmark that had survived decades of intense coastal sun, dust storms, and urban transformation without a single scratch was being fundamentally undermined by a corporate ego trip next door. The tower meant to celebrate Arabic heritage by mirroring it hadn't even risen past ground level, and it was already destroying it. Visual, techno-legal graphic, showing court documents flashing by, painted by financial counters ticking upward rapidly, litigation filed, 1975 foundation, detained Award, 4,170,000, totaled likely with interest, 11 Minerator v. O. The trustees of the heritage site didn't back down. In 1975, they slammed the investment conglomerate with a massive lawsuit, proving in court that the tower's negligent excavation methods had permanently undermined a designated historic sanctuary. A high court jury agreed, handing down a devastating $4.17 million judgment. With years of accumulated interest and legal penalties tacked on, the total liability skyrocketed past $11 million. It was a massive, humiliating public loss for a major financial institution, handed to them by a 19th-century house of worship. Visual, the timeline fast forward. The camera fly up the entire axis of the completed tower in bright sunlight, stopping on the stunning insulated blue Fakad Panasnar, VO. But as catastrophic as the excavation disaster was, it was nothing more than an opening act. The real horror show was about to fall directly from the sky. By 1972, the skyscraper's exterior envelope was nearing completion. The facade was an engineering marvel on paper. Approximately 10,344 massive, custom-manufactured insulated glass panels. Each individual unit was immense, measuring roughly 4 feet by 11 feet and weighing a staggering 500 pounds visual. 3D cross-section breakdown of a Fakad pan. Detail close-up on the insulated dual-pane design, the chromium coating, and the stiff metal frame with a solid lead tensor bond narrator. VO. These weren't ordinary windows. They were high-tech, dual-pane insulated sandwiches. The outer pane featured an advanced, hyper-reflective chromium coating on its inner surface to bounce back the blistering Middle Eastern sun. To hold this massive glass assembly together, the manufacturer used a highly rigid, unyielding solder bond to fix the glass directly to the heavy structural metal frame. Together, these 10,000 blue mirrors formed the seamless aerodynamic skin of the tower. But during construction, the sky began to break. Visual. We are the radar simulation showing a severe winter shamel, storm rushing over the waterfront. Wenstrel recreation. Ext. Upper floors, night. 75 mph winds howl past the sharp edges of the building. Narrator. On January 20th, 1973, a violent winter shamal tore through the Gulf, lashing the upper floors of the uncompleted tower with screaming wind gusts clocking over 75 miles per hour. What happened next belongs in a disaster movie. Under the immense aerodynamic pressure, 65 separate 500-pound glass panels failed simultaneously. Some spiderwebbed and imploded in place, showering the structural core with glass shrapnel. But dozens of others detached completely from their frames. 500-pound sheets of heavy, solid glass tumbled end over end from hundreds of feet in the air, slicing through the darkness and smashing into the high-end pedestrian boulevards below. Visual. Animated maps showing red expansion radiuses around the tower, illustrating closed streets and police checkpoints. Narrator. VO. It wasn't an isolated incident. Over the early 1970s, more than 100 massive panels failed and plummeted onto Copley Square's regional counterpart. The local police department was forced to implement an unprecedented emergency protocol. The moment desert winds reached 45 miles per hour, they completely cordoned off multiple city blocks. locking down luxury retail avenues and stopping traffic. An iconic landmark in Dubai's most expensive commercial hub had been transformed into a lethal falling object hazard zone. And the most terrifying part? For months, absolutely nobody could explain why it was happening. Visual, architects, executive management, and scientists stating in a boardroom with stacks of paperwork, with confidential and NDAA stamped across them in red narrator VO. Early engineering theories were all over the place. Some structural consultants blamed excessive building sway, arguing that extreme aerodynamic forces were creating localized negative pressure hotspots that literally sucked the glass right out of its channels. Others theorized that the ongoing foundation settlement from the excavation disaster was twisting the main structural steel frame out of alignment, popping the panels free. But getting to the actual technical truth was nearly impossible due to a toxic culture of corporate legal defensiveness. The high-profile architects, the global glass manufacturing titan, and the multi-billion-dollar developer immediately cloaked the entire crisis in ironclad non-disclosure agreements. Technical findings were classified. Public inquiries were stonewalled visual, 3D slow-motion engineering, rendering showing the thermal expansion defect. The glass tries to expand and flex in the intense heat, but the stiff integrated solder traps the stress until the glass explodes cognitively VO. But the laws of thermodynamics don't care about NDAs. When independent investigations finally pierced the corporate veil, they uncovered a design flaw that was both breathtakingly basic and damningly negligent. The issue wasn't the wind velocity or the building's sway. It was the rigid solder bond itself. In the brutal, shifting environment of the Gulf, where temperatures swing wildly between scorching daytime heat and cool coastal nights, large glass panels naturally need to expand, contract, and flex under wind vibration. But the micro-thin, hyper-stiff solder bond allowed for zero movement. It completely trapped the thermal and kinetic energy. Every time the wind blew or the sun beat down, immense structural stress was transferred directly back into the edge of the glass panes. Microscopic fatigue cracks formed along the perimeter, slowly propagating through the molecular structure of the glass until the panel fractured completely. The tower wasn't being broken by external forces. Its own mounting system was slowly grinding its skin to pieces from the inside out, waiting for a gust of wind to release the 500-pound blades. Visual. Drastic time-lapse footage showing the Sheni Tower gradually turning into a grid of brown wood panning as Replace Works Kilometers narrator, VO. While elite teams of international engineers here argued over liability behind closed doors. The building's changing appearance broadcast its structural failure to the entire world. To prevent more deaths, crews stripped out the cracked panels and replaced them with heavy sheets of marine-grade plywood, painted over with a cheap coat of blue latex paint to match the glass. Over an acre of the tower's sleek facade was replaced by a pathetic patchwork of wooden boards. Visual montage of archival newspaper headlines, social media mock-ups, and popular radio comedians laughing at the building the Dubai Globe. The Plywood Palace, the world's tallest waterfront. Plywood Tower, the biggest pain in the glass narrator, VO. The international press had an absolute field day. Premium media outlets published scathing exposés mocking the Plywood Palace. Local talk shows and lifestyle influencers turned the country's most exclusive corporate address into a permanent regional punchline. Senior executives at the investment group were caught in an absolute nightmare, lamenting to partners that they had over $100 million of liquid capital completely frozen in a structural carcass they couldn't legally occupy. Visual. Fast camera craned down to street level, focusing on closed doors and chaotic construction. Signage during a blowing sandstorm. VO. Think about the absolute public relations ruin. One of the wealthiest financial conglomerates in the Middle East. An entity whose entire brand identity was built on calculated risk mitigation, luxury, and perfection, had erected a 60-story, hyper-visible monument to architectural failure. The plywood phase didn't last weeks. It dragged on for agonizing years as the legal, engineering, and financial finger-pointing paralyzed the project. Every incoming storm system meant more falling debris, more total street lockdowns, and more humiliating global headlines. The symbol of cutting-edge modern engineering had become a 60-story advertisement for unmitigated corporate overreach. Scene end. Scene start visual. Cut to an ultra-modern industrial warehouse in the Jebel Ali Free. Multiple sections of the skyscraper's high-tech replace glass glide along an automated conveyor belt under arch lamps. Expert concrete engineers and forensic architects inspect a massive reconstructed model of the constructural envelope. Audio. Low synth beat kicks in steady, industrial, and high stakes. The clacking of massive heavy machinery echoes in the back narrator. VO. The corporate paralysis could not last forever. With over $100 million bleeding into the desert sand, the investment conglomerate faced a brutal ultimatum: completely overhaul the entire 60-story facade, or watch their flagship architectural miracle face a court-ordered demolition. The only path forward was an engineering operation of unprecedented scale, a total absolute replacement of the building's outer skin visual, 3D animation detailed comparison graphic. On the left, the old composite-insulated dual-pane glass with its flipped chromium interior edge and stiff solder freeve. On the right, the new monolithic heat-treated tempered glass aluminum narrator, VO. The engineering team threw out the original design entirely. Every single one of the 10,344 flawed dual-pane insulated units had to be systematically stripped out by crane teams dangling from the crown of the skyscraper. In their place, crews installed specialized monolithic, heat-treated tempered safety glass. This new structural glazing completely eliminated the catastrophic dual-pane sandwich design and the brittle solder joints. The monolithic tempered glass was engineered to flex, allowing it to easily absorb the massive pressure variations and seismic vibrations of high-altitude coastal winds without shattering. Visual. Computer simulation of cold winter air and high-velocity sandstorms interacting with a heat building interior narrator, VO. But this radical architectural cure carried a devastating, hidden structural penalty. The original dual-pane insulated panels had been engineered to provide an essential thermal barrier, locking out the brutal 50 degrees Celsius summer heat of the United Arab Emirates while trapping the climate-controlled air conditioning inside. The new monolithic single-pane tempered glass offered virtually zero insulation. Visual. Glowing red radar graphic representing incense, solar heat penetrating deep into the interior, glass core of the building narrator, VO. The structural modification instantly triggered a permanent thermodynamic crisis. Without the thermal separation, the skyscraper's interior became an absolute greenhouse. The cooling load skyrocketed, requiring the tower's massive industrial chiller plants to run at absolute maximum capacity 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, just to keep the luxury office floors from becoming unlivable hot boxes. Critics and independent MEP engineers noted that this massive energy penalty would compound over every single year of the building's functional life, a multi-million-dollar tax on operations baked directly into every utility bill for decades to come. Visual. Financial statistical counters spinning up fast over an aerial drone. View of the tower's clean. New compound, blue. Faced. Reglazing extra cost. Total renovation, upvarun. 15,000. Project total. Recorded over 550,000 orator, VO. The cost for the reglazing operation alone drained an estimated $5 to $7 million out of the developer's reserves. Leading international business journals reported that when you tallied up the emergency structural reinforcements, the legal fees, and the replacement glass materials, the total rectification works added an astronomical $15 million to the ledger. This helped push the final, consolidated cost of the skyscraper past $550 million, more than double what the investment board had originally budgeted. And even with the new glass secured, the building's envelope remained a constant maintenance nightmare. Water leakage through the joints and roofing system failures continued to plague consulting engineers for years, proving that fast-tracked structural experiments leave scars that never truly heal. Visual. Hard cut to the 58th floor of the skyscraper. The camera enters a stark, enormous mechanical room with massive, reinforced rectangular blocks resting on gleaming hydraulic struts. Audio, the ominous sound of slow, hydraulic compression and decompression. A deep hiss, groan, thump, narrator VO. But the glass raining onto the streets was actually shielding an even deeper, more terrifying engineering vulnerability. Long before the plywood palace was cured, corporate workers on the upper luxury floors had been reporting deeply unsettling experiences. During high-velocity Shamal windstorms, the skyscraper didn't just stand firm, it swayed. It swayed so violently that executive workers experienced acute motion sickness, watching water ripple in their cups and light fixtures swing across boardroom ceilings, visual. Black and with schematic of the historical Wright brothers wind tunnel at Mortaling, the Dubai Coastal Terrain narrator, VO. To diagnose this terrifying structural instability, aeronautical engineers built an incredibly detailed, highly accurate scale model of the tower and its surrounding business bay, marina topographic environment. They mounted it inside a world-class institutional wind tunnel facility, subjecting the structural model to simulated Category 4 hurricane forces. The wind tunnel data confirmed their worst fears. The building's dynamic aerodynamic response to lateral wind forces was significantly more volatile than the original mathematical models had predicted, visual. 3D architectural rendering breaking down the mechanical operations of a tuned mass damper narrator, VO. To save the tower from structural failure, engineers turned to a technology that was still incredibly rare and experimental for Middle Eastern skyscrapers at the time. They carved out an immense mechanical zone on the 58th floor and installed a colossal tuned mass damper system. Visual, technical specifications popping up around a wireframe model of the damper units. System type, dual-tuned mass damper material. Massive reinforced lead blocks dimensions, 17 feet square by 3 feet high combing to tall weight, 600 tons narrator VO. This system consisted of 2 gargantuan steel boxes, packed tight with heavy solid lead blocks. Each box measured 17 feet square and weighed 300 tons, creating a combined counterweight of 600 tons sitting right near the apex of the tower. These massive blocks were mounted on precision-engineered, lubricated steel plates and anchored directly to the building's core structural frame, using a sophisticated matrix of high-tension springs and hydraulic shock absorbers. Visual, 3D mechanical animation showing the building swaying to the left under a Severi wind load, while the 600 lead blocks slide instantly to the right, pulling the structure back to true center. VO. The physics behind it are pure genius. When a powerful desert wind gust slams into the tower, forcing the upper floors to sway in one direction, the 600 tons of lead counterweights inertia lag behind, sliding smoothly on their lubricated tracks in the exact opposite direction. This massive counterweight pull instantly dampens the tower's kinetic oscillation, stabilizing the structural frame and preventing the human occupants from experiencing debilitating vertigo. Visual, the graphic flash and alert sign. Critical design defect detect, lateral system failure narrator, VO. The installation of this massive dampening system drained another $3 million from the project. But as the wind tunnel testing continued, analysts uncovered a far more chilling reality than simple interior occupant discomfort. When engineers ran calculations on the skyscraper's lateral structural system under specific wind vectors, particularly gusts striking the tower's extremely narrow, razor-sharp side faces, they realized something that turned their blood cold. The original structural engineering design left almost zero margin for error. Under a worst-case wind event, the skyscraper was at a genuine calculable risk of an outright catastrophic structural collapse. Visual, dramatic recreation. The camera fly through a simulated urban, core residential sector in Dubai at night during a storm. The scraper swaz past its critical breaking point, and the electrical framing splinters. Narrato. Let the absolute gravity of that finding sink in for a moment. This wasn't an abstract mathematical exercise concerning a concept sketch on an architect's desk. This was a completed, fully realized, multi-million-dollar occupied office skyscraper standing dead in the center of one of the most densely populated luxury districts on Earth. And the elite structural scientists who were now studying the real-world wind tunnel data could not guarantee that the building would remain standing if a historic coastal storm hit the waterfront. Visual. Fast action montage. Workmen operating heavy torches and impact wrenches cognitively, reinforcing Gianskal beams. Outside office sectors. Narrator VO. The emergency corporate response was immediate, absolute, and completely hidden from public view to avoid a mass real estate panic. Teams of specialized ironworkers were brought in under strict secrecy. They welded and bolted a staggering 1,500 tons of heavy diagonal steel, bracing directly into the core structural framing of the tower. Simultaneously, they installed approximately 300 massive, custom-fabricated L-shaped steel reinforcement beams throughout the vulnerable floor plates. Visual, financial text flace and vanishes. Emergency and structural bracing. 1,500 tons total reinforcement cost. 5 million thousand a narrator. VO. This $5 million operation wasn't a luxury cosmetic upgrade or a high-end comfort refinement. This was extreme, emergency structural surgery performed on a living, breathing skyscraper, because the engineers were terrified that the building might literally snap in half during a severe storm. A premier global life insurance and wealth management conglomerate had built a flagship headquarters that was quite literally a threat to human life. The ultimate corporate irony had written itself in steel and lead. Scene end. Scene start. Visual. Monochrome corporate boardroom in downtown Dubai. Night. The glare of the Burj Khalifa flares through the backdrop windowed. Litigation files are piled high on a mahogany table. A senior expatriate lawyer in a bespoke suit paces aggressively, flipping through sections of a high court subpoena. Audio. Low tense piano chords synced with a slowly accelerating metronome tick. The sound of papers rustling and a pen heavily slamming on a table. Narrator. When a $500 million luxury icon starts shedding its skin onto the streets of a global financial hub, the boardroom ceases to be a place of commerce. It becomes a war room. By 1975, the financial bleed from the tower was no longer something the investment conglomerate's accountants could hide behind clever write-offs. The litigation dam had completely burst. Visual, graphic animation of a court gavel smashing down, transitioning into a digital timeline showing 6 separate international engineering and architectural corporations. Plaintiff. The global investment conglomerate defendants, detailed architectural firm plus 5 global fabrication tits claims, architectural Nicholas, facade design Flaz, and breach of contract. Narrator VO. In a move that shattered the standard etiquette of high-stakes Gulf real estate development, the state-backed investment group filed a massive, scorched earth lawsuit against the principal architectural firm and 5 other elite international subcontractors involved in the design and manufacture of the defective facade. They were seeking to claw back every single dollar spent on the emergency replacement of all 10,344 panes of glass, alongside the massive losses incurred, while their premier asset sat completely empty. Visual. The timeline cognitively fast-forward to 1981. The words settled out of court. Recker Sealed. Stamp across the screen in bold, graphite letters. Narrator. VO. The legal battle dragged on for 6 agonizing years, turning into a multi-million-dollar black hole for everyone involved. Then, in 1981, just as the technical discovery phase threatened to expose the internal structural engineering failures to the global media, the case abruptly vanished. A massive out-of-court settlement was reached. The financial terms? Completely classified. The non-disclosure agreements that had choked the initial engineering investigations were locked down permanently, erecting an impenetrable wall of secrecy around the exact technical blunders and financial payouts of the crisis. Visual. Split screen recreation. On the left, the reglazed skyscraper glitters in the sunlight. On the right, high-resolution macro. Images of a pair of hands adjusting heavy binoculars from an Opus rooftop sector. Narrator VO. But while the corporate lawyers successfully buried the public records, the daily reality of managing the skyscraper remained an absolute nightmare. Even with the new monolithic tempered glass completely installed, the building's relationship with its own facade was deeply unstable. Sealed records emerging from parallel litigation tracks revealed an engineering protocol that sounds like absolute madness for a premier Tier 1 tower. Visual. Ixt. Opust rooftop, day, action shot. An engineering inspection team in high-vis vests stands behind a mounted system of specialized polarized lens. The camera looked through the lens, showing one glass panel deep in the middle of the tower glowing in ominous, ink dark purple under the polarized filter narrator, VO. The developer was forced to hire full-time facade spotters. Every single day, these specialized inspectors were stationed on adjacent rooftops, armed with high-powered military-grade binoculars and custom polarized lenses. Their sole job? To scan the 70-story glass skin, panel by panel, hour after hour, looking for a highly specific visual anomaly, a telltale structural darkening within the reflection of the glass, visual 3D engineering close-up, interior cross-section showing molecular fatigue in the corner of the glass upnet, the stress builds, and a repel-place crane is immediately deployed to snatch the panel from the frame before it explodes narrator, VO. That microscopic darkening was the visual signature of internal molecular stress. It meant the tempered panel was already failing from the inside out and could spontaneously burst at any moment. The moment a spotter flagged a stressed panel, emergency maintenance crews were scrambled to replace the glass before it could fracture and drop 500 pounds of shrapnel onto the luxury car lanes below. A premier ultra-luxury office tower in the heart of Dubai's most affluent waterfront district literally required full-time human lifeguards just to prevent its exterior walls from injuring unsuspecting pedestrians. Visual, recreation, INT. High-end marina luxury apartment overlooking the tower. An expatriate executive sits at a desk, looking anxiously out the window, as repel-place cranes swing past his view narrator VO. Behind the corporate legal drama stood the human cost. The high-net-worth expats, local business owners, and corporate tenants who had bought into the dream of an elite architectural masterpiece, only to find themselves living and working next to a structural hazard. Stefan de Vries, managing partner, hedge fund tenant, recreation actor, serious, accented delivery, looking directly into the camera. We paid a massive premium to secure the top 2 floors of that tower for our regional headquarters. It was supposed to signal to our global clients that we had arrived at the pinnacle of luxury in Dubai. Instead, for the first 2 years, our clients couldn't even walk through the main entrance because of the safety tunnels. Every time a storm came through, our staff was ordered to evacuate the perimeter offices because management feared the windows would blow inward. You are trying to run a multi-million-dollar fund while watching 500-pound blocks of wood and glass swing outside your window. It was completely absurd. Visual. Ext. High waterfront boulevard day. Recreation of a boutique caf ogre, standing side an amble outdoor patio corded off with heavy red safadi plastic tapes Samina Al-Mansouri. Retail boutique ogre. Recreation actor, frustrated, intense energy. The marketing told us this tower would bring tens of thousands of high-spending pedestrian customers directly to our doorsteps. Instead, the police closed our outdoor terraces for months at a time because of the falling object hazard. My terrace wasn't a place for elite clients to drink coffee. It was an impact zone. When the wind hit 45 miles per hour, they literally locked down the street. I lost 60% of my revenue in a single season, while the developers hid behind their non-disclosure agreements, pretending everything was perfectly fine. Visual. Series of quick cuts of the compiled tower reflecting the golden hour sunlight, contrasting with graphic wireframes of the H&L bracing hidden narrator, VO. The extreme disparity between the public-facing glamour and the internal engineering desperation defined every single stage of the project. On paper, the developers were selling the ultimate vision of seamless, zero-ornament futurism. In reality, they were managing a frantic, invisible industrial salvage operation just to keep the structure viable. Visual. Move slowly up. The sharp corner, edges of the building into skyline narrator, VO. The corporate tenants who eventually moved in had absolutely no idea that directly behind the high-end drywall of their luxury executive boardrooms sat 1,500 tons of heavy, industrial diagonal steel bracing. They didn't know that when they felt a slight, dizzying sensation on a windy afternoon, a massive 600-ton lead block was sliding silently on lubricated steel tracks right above their heads on the 58th floor just to keep the building from tearing itself apart. The elite asset was completely functional, but its survival depended entirely on a hidden life support system of massive structural surgery. Scene end. Scene start visual. Chronomontage. The camera sweeps majestically from street level up to the gleaming summit of the tower. Time-lapse shifts rapidly from a blazing desert Meridian to a neon's Dubai night. Sensational energy text explodes on screen September 29, 1976. Grand opening 5 years behind schedule, final cost, double the billion dirham budget studio. Cyberpunk style, urgent synth beat climax, aggressive driving, and insightful narrator VO. On September 29, 1976, the glass skyscraper finally cut its ribbon and opened its doors for full commercial occupancy. It was a moment of supreme corporate theater. The elite investment conglomerate popped champagne in the grand atrium, celebrating what they hailed as an absolute triumph of modern design and forward-thinking architecture. Visual. The camera plunges into a fast trace of the tower's devastating track record. Fetching graphics crash down in sync with a heavy kick drum, narrato. But no amount of corporate marketing spin could erase the brutal, multi-million-dollar wreckage left in this building's wake. The project was running staggering 5 years behind its original master schedule. The final capital expenditure had bloated to over double the initial estimate. The construction had physically cracked open and undermined a designated National Heritage Landmark. It had literally rained over 100 lethal, 500-pound glass blades onto public avenues, forcing the local police to lock down entire luxury sectors. For years, its multi-million-dollar facade was completely smothered in a pathetic patchwork of blue-painted marine plywood. It required 600 tons of emergency lead counterweights and 1,500 tons of heavy internal structural bracing just to guarantee it wouldn't collapse in a standard coastal storm. And to top it off, the developer had spent over half a decade in a toxic, multi-million-dollar legal war against its own principal architect. Visual, hard flash to the architectural award ceremony glamour. An architect recognized by elite figures, contrasted with footage of police corridors around the plywood palace. Narrator. And then in 1977 came the ultimate systemic punchline. The prestigious Regional Architectural Association looked past the falling glass, looked past the cracked, historic mosque, looked past the emergency steel braces, and handed the tower its highest national honor award. Let that absolute contradiction sink in. The elite architectural community saw an absolute masterpiece. A building of immaculate proportions, razor-edged minimalism, and a striking, poetic relationship to its urban site. The public, however, saw a terrifying corporate hazard that closed their streets, drained their public resources, and couldn't keep its own skin from flying off. Both of these realities were completely true at the exact same time. Visual. Drone shot slowly orbiting the tower in the modern era. The reflective coating looks perfect, rejecting the intense glow-pole heat. Infographics pop up in crisp white type, Kurfdienst, the lat regional headquarters, tonned mass damper, active on the 58th floor core, fit 500 tons of diagonal bracing remiterator, VO. Today, the skyscraper still dominates the local skyline, rebranded under a new corporate asset acquisition strategy. To the casual international tourist, or the high-net-worth expat grabbing an espresso on the Marina Promenade, the building looks utterly flawless. It stands as a serene, seamless blue mirror, perfectly reflecting the traditional minarets of the Heritage Center and the multi-million-dollar superyachts of the luxury waterfront, as if absolutely nothing had ever gone wrong. Visual. Computer graphic X-ray vision scanning through the outside glass skin deep into the core to show the mechanical operations continuing today. Narrator. VO. But that serenity is nothing more than a micro-thin surface illusion. Underneath the gleaming high-gloss facade lies a dark permanent legacy of systemic engineering failure. The massive tuned mass damper system still operates on the 58th floor, its 600 tons of lead blocks silently sliding back and forth on lubricated tracks to fight off every wind gust pushing against the structure. The monolithic tempered replacement glass panels have held for decades, but they continue to draw massive, inflated energy loads from the district chiller plants. And deep inside the luxury office suites, hidden completely behind the premium drywall, those 1,500 tons of emergency diagonal steel bracing remain permanently bolted to the frame, invisible to the corporate tenants, but absolutely vital to keeping the skyscraper from snapping in half. Visual, wide-drone shot out from the waterfront sector, capturing hundreds of similar all-glass mega-structures lining the coastline. Narrator, VO. This tower isn't just a historic anomaly. It is an active case study taught in elite engineering universities across the globe. It stands as a stark warning of what happens when hyper-aggressive design concepts, unproven materials, and highly volatile coastal soil conditions collide on a fast-track development schedule without adequate real-world testing. The tower that was engineered to honor its historic neighbor came dangerously close to wiping it off the map. The pristine facade, meant to dissolve into the bright blue sky, rained 500-pound projectiles onto civilian walkways. And the elite investment conglomerate whose entire business empire was built on predicting and managing corporate risk proved utterly incapable of managing its own. Visual, the camera soars over the tower axis, looking down the entire crumb skin toward the crash zone as the sound of a wind shamel fades. YouTube end screen elements pop in. Narrator, VO. It remains one of the tallest, most iconic luxury buildings in the entire region, but it stands as a permanent monument to human and architectural hubris, a reminder that in the high-stakes world of modern megaprojects, the terrifying distance between an architectural masterpiece and a catastrophic civic disaster is sometimes just a few millimeters of rigid solder on the wrong side of a glass panel. Scene end.